Once upon a time, there was a king in an ascendant position, and he was walking with his advisor by the lake. And he noticed an old man at the center of the lake, and he was casting his net, drawing in the fish, dumping the fish back into the water. Casting his net, drawing the fish, dumping it back into the water. And the king said to his advisor, "What is that man doing? I want to speak to him." So the advisor went to the edge of the lake and said, "Hey you, the king would like to have a word with you." And so the fisherman brought his boat to the edge of the lake, came to the king, bowed deeply before the king, and said, "Your Majesty." And the king said, "What are you doing out there? You're not fishing." And the old man said, "Your Majesty, if you have ears to hear, I've got quite a story for you." And the king said, "I love stories. Please share your story with me." And so the old man began, "I've been here fishing at this lake for so long, since I was a very, very young man. I would come out here every day, I would catch my fish, I would bring them to the market, I would sell it, and if I had anything left over, I would bring it home, and I would have my mother cook us dinner with this fish. And every night as we ate dinner, she would berate me, and she would say, 'Do you want to see me die an old woman with no grandchildren? When will you find yourself a woman?' But you see," said the old man to the king, "I wasn't ready to settle down yet. I was so content with my life." But this changed one day. I was out there in the middle of the lake, right where you saw me, and I cast my net, and as I pulled it in, there were no fish, but there was a large wooden box. I brought the wooden box into my boat, and I opened it, and there was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen in my life. And she looked up at me, and she said, "Hello." And I looked down at her and said, "Hi, who are you?" And she said, "I'm your wife." And so I picked her up, I put her next to me on the boat, I rowed home with the box in one hand, my wife in the other. We ran home. And when I got there, my mother opened the door, looked at her, and said, "Is this her? Is she the one?" And I said, "Yes." And my mother was overjoyed, and her life was filled with so much happiness. I would still go out to fish, but when I came back home, the house was filled with laughter and singing and joy, and I was overjoyed as well. And I thought, this is happiness. And I decided, being a fisherman does not do it justice. I'm going to become something better for my wife. So I decided to become a goldsmith. And so one day I was at my workshop, and I was working on a very difficult necklace, and I was placing the jewels. And all of a sudden I smelled a scent in the room that I wasn't familiar with, and I looked around to see where it was coming from, and I saw that the door to my workshop had opened. And 3 women that were veiled walked in one step, and in one voice they looked at me and said, "Goldsmith, are you happy?" And I laughed in their faces, and I said, "Of course I'm happy. I've got the most beautiful wife, my mother is healthy and happy, yes, I'm happy." And they just looked right back at me and they replied, "Well, if you're happy." And they turned around and they walked out again in one step, the door shutting behind them with the scent and the question lingering in the air. And I tried to go back to work on the necklace, but I couldn't. I had that question stuck in the back of my head, was I happy? Why did these women choose me? Why did they ask me that question? And that day I paced around, I couldn't finish the necklace, I decided to leave my workshop, I roamed the streets for many, many hours, and eventually darkness fell and I realized I had to go back home. And when I went home, my mother said, "Where have you been? You missed dinner. Your wife is very upset upstairs right now." So I went upstairs and I went up there. My wife was laying on the bed. She was curled up and I knew I should have comforted her. I knew I should have apologized, but I couldn't. I still had that question in my head, you see. So I just laid down there in bed thinking about that question all night. Was I happy? Was I happy? Why did they ask me that question? Of course I'm happy. And the next morning, I got up out of bed and I went back to my workshop and I picked up the necklace that I had to work on. But I couldn't do it. I put the necklace down and I just waited. And at the same exact time, again, I smelled the scent and I turned, the door opened, the 3 veiled women came in, they said, "Goldsmith, are you happy?" And I wasn't so sure this time, but I said, yes, I'm happy. I think so. And the woman said, "Well, if you're happy." And again, they turned around and left, door closing, the question and scent still lingering in the air. And this time I was angry. I was mad. Why did they keep coming back and questioning my happiness? I knew I was happy, but maybe I wasn't so sure. That night I couldn't even go back home. I stayed at my workshop the entire night thinking about this question about what was even happiness. Was I happy? I didn't sleep a wink. The next day I knew they were coming back, so I waited. I didn't even pick up any of the necklaces, any of the jewels. I sat there and I waited, and again, they came in, they walked in, "Goldsmith, are you happy?" And I said, "No, I'm not happy. Tell me, what's happiness? What is it?" And they said, "Follow us." And they walked out of the room, and so I followed them. And we walked through streets that I've known my entire life until we got to streets that I'd never seen before in my life. And eventually we came to a big oak door with a knocker. And one of the ladies opened the door, and when we entered, it was a huge courtyard filled with sunlight and music, and there were women dancing, and there were delicious smells. One of the women sat me down and she started to massage me. The other woman was washing my feet, and the last lady was feeding me delicious food as I just sat there, and I thought, this is happiness. This is happiness. And there were songs playing. As the song came to an end, the three ladies stepped in front of me. They dropped their veils, and Your Majesty, they were the most beautiful women I'd ever seen. I thought my wife was beautiful, but these women, said the old man to the king. And they said, you can have us. Choose. So I chose one of the veiled women. Now she was unveiled. And I said, I choose you. She picked up her veil again and she said, you must go back home, take your wife, put her in the box, drop her back in the lake, and then you can come back and you can have me. So I left. I ran home, again through the streets that I had just seen for the first time until I came to the streets that I knew my whole life. Then I went home and I burst through the door and my mother said, where have you been? We've been worried sick about you. You didn't even come home last night. And I said, Mother, I don't have time for questions right now. I ran up the stairs, burst through the bedroom, and my wife was startled and said, is everything okay? What's the matter? And I said, don't ask any questions right now. I grabbed the box, I grabbed my wife, and we ran down the stairs, bump, 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 box going down behind me, and I left my house with my mother screaming after us. We finally made it to the lake, and I hadn't been here in a long time, but my boat was still there. And I put the box in the boat, and I told my wife, get inside the boat, get inside the box. And she looked at me and said, have I upset you somehow? Did I do something wrong? And I said, don't ask any questions, just get in the box. And she did. She so obediently got into the box. I shut the box, I got into the boat, I rowed out to the center of the lake, and I dropped the box. And as I saw the box dropping, I felt this immense weight of that question lifting off of my shoulders. So I got back into the boat, I rowed again to the edge of the lake, I got out, and I ran through the streets, and I was looking for that door with the knocker. But Your Majesty, said the old man to the king, I couldn't find it. I couldn't find the courtyard. I started to ask everybody around me, and I described the door with the knocker, and everyone said, we have no idea what you're talking about. There's no such courtyard. There's no such door around this area. You know this. You've been here forever. I walked for hours and hours in the darkness, and eventually my feet led me to the only place that they knew. I went back home. When I opened the door, my mother said, well, where is she? Where's my daughter-in-law? And I had no other choice. I told her everything from the beginning, about the box, about the courtyard, what I had just done. And she had her head in her hands and she said, what have you done, my son? You're such a fool, you're such a fool. But it's not too late. Maybe it's not too late. Just go back there, go to the lake, cast your net, find her again, and bring her back home. And so I said, okay. I turned around and I went back to the lake. I got into my boat, I rowed out to the center of the lake, right where you saw me, and I cast my net. But when I brought my net in, all I saw were fish. So I dumped the fish back, and I cast my net again. And you see, Your Majesty, I've been here ever since, every single day, looking for my wife, because I will find her. I will. But now that you know my story, I must get back to work, because today might be the day that I find my wife. And with that, the old man bowed deeply before the king. He got back into his boat, and he rowed out to the center of the lake, and he cast his net. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, most welcome guest, Viviana. Thank you so much. It was so entertaining and at the same time thought-provoking. I have something to think about over the weekend. And really, it has so many layers. The project Viviana was delivering today was the folk tale. The objective for the speakers were to tell a folk tale that is entertaining, certainly it was, and enjoyable for a specific age group. I think it was very universal for any age group. And she was supposed to use vivid imagery and voice to enhance the tale. And I think that Viviana has done it wonderfully. And it was very interesting. It wasn't a usual storytelling style. A slow one, once upon a time. There was no performing, and this is great. This is something the project asked the speaker to do, not to perform something in front of us, but tell the story. And we were leaning in. I could see everybody leaning in through the Viviana delivery of the speech. And the speech had this delivery had very individual features, Viviana features. The voice was soft. There were very subtle pauses not just long one, to no exaggeration actually. And I think this gave it a very special, made this speech very special. I still have several suggestions. You told me that when you practiced this speech, you were running over time. So I thought it would be a bit rushed through the delivery. And it did feel like this in the beginning. I sort of wanted to hear more about this king, an advisor, but then I understood that this is a story within a story, and it was a fisherman who was telling this story. So starting from the point when fisherman stepped in to tell the story, the rushing was substantiated. I think that's how would fisherman tell his story, rushing to go back fishing for the box with his wife. My suggestion for this speech, if you ever tell the story again, think about these multi-layers in the story. So I feel that it wasn't the story about a husband who lost his wife because he was so careless or trying to hunt something he couldn't have. I think it was a story about each of us when the life gives us a present and we are too smart to be happy. We start asking ourselves questions. So I wanted some closure and resolution at the end. Since this tale was so symbolic, what about the mother? What is the role of the king in it? What is the role of this advisor? So just think about it and add it at the end to wrap the story up. Thank you so much. I'm looking forward to many more of your speeches, and I can see you telling this story to your children sometime.
Couple more years.